The scarlet 312B Ferrari sits on the Monza grid, hot oil ticking, the Tifosi a living roar on the other side of the fences. Inside the cockpit, a fierce pair of eyes under heavy brows, the moustache you could sketch from memory, the hands that never quite seemed to relax on the wheel. Gianclaudio Clay Regazzoni did not arrive in Formula One to make up the numbers. He came to fight, to outbrake you into the corner and stare you down on the way out. And for a decade, he was the heartbeat of an era. Part artist, part street fighter, always full of heart. He came from Ticino in the Italian-speaking south of Switzerland, born on the 5th of September 1939 and raised on engine noise and metalwork. Switzerland had banned circuit racing after 1955, so if you wanted to become a racer, you had to be stubborn enough to cross borders and keep turning up. Clay started relatively late, hustling an Austin Healey Sprite and then an F3 Brabham before finding a natural home with techno. The Pendazzari brothers' cars were quick and a bit edgy, and so was he. In Formula 2 he learned how to win tight fights against serious names, and in 1970 he stitched together an Ironman season to take the European F2 title for techno, evidence that the speed, the racecraft and the mental ballast were all there. There was darkness too. In 1968 at Zandvoort he was involved in the accident that killed Chris Lambert, a loss that weighed on him even after an inquest cleared him. Clay carried on, as drivers at that time had to, by driving hard, often and without backward glance once the visor came down. That was his way through. Ferrari came calling in 1970, and the impact was immediate. He debuted at Zandvoort, scored points, returned at Silverstone, and brought home more, then planted himself in the car as if he'd always been there. 5 starts after his first Grand Prix, he won at Monza in the 312B, a rookie stepping onto the top step in front of the most demanding crowd in motors racing. He finished his first season third in the World Championship behind Jochen Rindt and teammate Jackie Ickx. If you wanted to know what kind of driver he was, there it was. Quick enough to win at home for Ferrari in year one, tough enough to live at the sharp end with no time to settle. He left Maranello for BRM in 1973 and found one of the most defining moments of his life at Kyalami. After a lap 3 collision, his P160 burst into flames and Clay was knocked unconscious. Mike Hailwood pulled him up, ran into the fire, was himself set ablaze, was doused, and ran back in again to haul Clay out. Hailwood later received the George Medal for bravery. Regazzoni carried the scars and the memory, and he went racing again. That was the man, shaken, scorched, grateful, but back in a car at the next opportunity. Ferrari brought him home in 1974, pairing him with an eager Austrian named Niki Lauda. The combination transformed the Scuderia. Regazzoni was ruggedly consistent and capable of raw pace when it mattered. Lauda was forensic and brutally fast over a season. Clay won the German Grand Prix at the Nürburgring, led every lap and thrust himself into a title fight that would go down to the wire. Watkins Glen became the decider. He needed to finish ahead of Emerson Fittipaldi, but an ailing front dampener turned the Ferrari evil. He wrestled with it, pitted twice, fell through the order to 11th, and watched the crown go to Fittipaldi. It was one of those endings only motor racing can deliver. The fighter who had done everything right for 9 months, undone by a lump of metal on a Sunday afternoon. If 1974 left a bruise, 1975 showed resilience. Ferrari's 312T was a masterpiece, and the team was ascendant. Clay's victory at Monza that year, with Lauda sealing the title the same day, was pure cinema. The Tifosi flooding the track, the red cars owning Italy's grand stage, the Swiss hard charger on the top step again, where he'd first announced himself back in 1970. He added a win in the non-championship Swiss Grand Prix at Dijon, a poignant result for a Swiss driver from a nation where circuit racing was banned. The next spring he went to Long Beach for the inaugural US Grand Prix West and delivered a clinical, pole, fastest lap, control from the front, and a lights to flag victory on the streets. The numbers were building. 5 victories across his career, 28 podiums, 5 poles, 15 fastest laps. But the statistics only tell you just how often he won. They don't tell you how he won. That was always the draw with Clay. He could be raggedly aggressive and he could be mechanically sympathetic. He could commit to a pass and then spend the next 20 laps carving out a rhythm that protected his tyres and his brakes. He was old school in the best way. Elbows if needed, handshake if it wasn't, A racer first, last and always. Jody Scheckter, who knew him well and fought him often, once said of Regazzoni that if he'd been a cowboy, he'd have been the one in the black hat. It was affectionate and accurate, the swagger, the edge, the sense that if a gap existed, Clay would arrive in it. Ferrari moved on at the end of 1976 as the team tried to balance Lauda's comeback with new dynamics, and Regazzoni set off on a tour of the paddock's middle order. Ensign, Shadow, and then in 1979, a seat at Williams, just as Frank Williams and Patrick Head were turning potential into power. Silverstone that July became history. Alan Jones had the speed, but not the luck. Clay had both the judgment and the opportunity. He brought the FW07 home to take Williams' first ever Grand Prix victory, a result that detonated the next decade for the team and stood as Regazzoni's last win. Watch the footage and you see every facet. Calm on the wheel, ruthlessly neat, no wasted inches. It was a veteran's drive with the pioneer's significance. He tried the Indy 500 in 1977 with Theodore Racing in a McLaren M16. Qualified, ran into trouble, and chalked it up as experience. He did sports cars too, including an early shot at Le Mans with Ferrari in 1970. Clay's career always had that broader canvas. He was a man who said yes to driving the next machine and then figured out how to make it dance. And then Long Beach again, this time in 1980. And this time the day, everything changed. Back with Ensign, his car failed to stop properly at the end of the shoreline drive and slammed into a parked Brabham beyond the barriers. The impact was devastating. He survived but suffered a spinal injury that left him a paraplegic. In the pit lane, in hospital, and later at home, the kindness he'd shown others in a tough paddock came back the other way in waves. The racing world rallied around him because he had always been one of its truest competitors. If you thought that was the end of the story, you didn't know Clay Regazzoni. He learned hand controls. He found ways to compete again, rally aids like Paris-Dakar, endurance events in hand-controlled cars, demonstrations and tests to show what was possible. He became an advocate and a fundraiser for people with spinal cord injuries, putting his name and time into helping others find mobility and independence. Ask those who worked with him what made Clay different, and they'll tell you about feel, the way he could run at the limit without burning the car to the ground, the way he could sense a tyre giving up or a damper going away and drive around it lap after lap. They'll talk about honesty, the straight answers in debrief, the look that said he'd given you everything he had. They'll remember the charisma too, the moustache, the grin, the easy way with fans. In the Ferrari garage, he was an anchor when the team needed muscle. At Williams, he was a catalyst when a new empire was learning how to win. He was the kind of presence who made a paddock feel like it has proper grown-ups in it. He lived long enough to enjoy the affection his career had earned. He worked as a broadcaster in Italy and Switzerland. He turned up in pit lanes and paddocks and was greeted like family. He never stopped being a racer in the things that mattered. The curiosity about the cars, the opinion about the drivers, the ability to read a race like a chessboard with danger at the edges. On the 15th of December 2006, he was killed in a road accident near Parma. The shock was universal and sincere. Tributes flew in from Ferrari, Williams, former teammates, former rivals, Lauda, Fittipaldi, Stewart, Mazzario. Men who do not throw around praise cheaply. They knew what he had been, a pillar of the 1970s, a driver whose best days were unforgettable and whose bad days still showed a level of fight most would envy. Think about the arc. A Swiss kid from a country where circuit racing was banned becomes the heartbeat of Ferrari at its renaissance. Duels for a world title, wins again at Monza in front of the faithful, adds a street race masterclass in Long Beach, and then years later gives the young British team its very first Grand Prix victory at home. Between those points he survives fire and returns to race, survives a spinal shattering crash and returns to drive. The line that runs through it all is hard to miss, courage expressed as commitment. He never backed away from the next corner, the next car, or the next chapter. You can measure him by the record, the 5 wins, 28 podiums, 5 poles and 15 fastest laps, or you can measure him by what people remember, the Monza roars, the black hat swagger Scheckter teases him about, the way he looked haunched into a 312T like he and the car were cut from the same piece of metal. The sight of him, older and smiling, teaching a hand control system to someone who thought they'd never drive again. Both tallies say the same thing. Clay Regazzoni raced with heart. He left the sport with stories and standards that still matter. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of the Racing Chronicles. We've got plenty more stories coming your way, so stay tuned for the next chapter in racing history. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.